let me interrupt because we just went live. Um, it's part of the charm of this is it has a certain putting on a play in your garage quality. Um, excuse me. Look, I'm Stuart Stevens. This is Tim Mak here. Um, Tim, thanks for doing this, man. Um,
Sure.
the last time the two of us connected is when we were. I was writing our column, off and on for the Daily Beast, and you were a Daily Beast star reporter. That was when John Avalon was editing Daily Beast. Um, and I don't know when, after Romney lost. He lost, by the way, Tuesday, 2014 or something. And since then, you've gone on to have like one of the most interesting trajectories. And just tell me, take us through quickly from the Daily Beast to
I
what you're
joined the
doing now.
U.S. Army in 2017, became a medic. Um,
Well, just so well, you just kind of buried the lead there, as they say, dude. You joined the army in 2017. So how old were you?
I was 29. I turned 30 in basic training. I remember that because I
That's
remember
a good opening line for a memoir, by the way. I turned 30 in basic training, but anyway,
doing 30 push-ups on my birthday so it was a memorable day for me.
it's good
Uh,
you didn't wait till you were 60. Um,
I
so what? So let's just talk about what was your motivation to join. I mean, that let's just say I think we both, can say of the journalist we all know, and I think the career path of well, I'm going to be a journalist for a few years, and then I'm going to join the army. It's not like a typical career path. What motivated you to do this?
I realized that during a zombie apocalypse, no one's going like, "We need a reporter immediately, like get us." But they always need a medic. And I wanted to do something with my hands. I realized over time that I'm a better journalist than I am a medic. But it was a really interesting window into that side of America. And so, it changed a lot of things for me, right? As a medic, I ended up helping with when the COVID pandemic hit, I ended up volunteering, working on testing and later vaccinations. And then I got out of I was on the reserve side, so I was out in the West Virginia Army National Guard, right? And so I got out in 2022.
Now,
And
why West Virginia? Were you living in West Virginia then, or is this just
uh,
an assignment, or how does that work?
so the bottom line is that, the Eastern Panhandle is just 90 minutes outside of DC, where I was living.
Yeah,
And,
yep, sure.
and West Virginia's Army National Guard has special operations units, and I was always very interested in doing work with special operations units. And I
Yeah, I've
ultimately
seen pictures of you on helicopters and stuff. Yeah.
Well, yeah. So that was why I pursued West Virginia in particular. And then after I got out of the military in 2022, I was working as a correspondent for NPR at the time. So I was juggling Army duties, NPR. So weekdays, NPR, weekends, Army stuff. And then after I left the Army, I suddenly could go wherever I wanted for work. And NPR sent me to Kyiv because of my military and medical background in case a war might break out, in case. And I arrived the night the war did break out.
See,
The
so you think this is a coincidence? So perhaps this is all your fault, just like JD Vance and the Pope.
flight
Do
in
you really think this is a coincidence? Um, you know. mm.
I
But look,
flight
before we do this, let me just ask you a question here. You can, 'cause I think people would be interested in this. I'm interested in it anyway, so I'm going to ask it. You can uh, go to the U.S. Army and say, "I want to be a medic," and
Yeah,
follow a path that allows you to do that. It's
yes. If you decide to go enlisted, you can choose your job in the US Army.
interesting. Okay. So you went in knowing that you were going to have a set period of training and then you would go into the reserves.
That's correct. Yeah. So
Yeah.
you basic training, you go through combat medicine school, and then you end up uh, posted to your unit. And then that's when I was on the reserve side, where I would drill on the weekends and then spend weekdays working my full time job.
Wow. That's amazing. So tell us just about that first night. So how did you get to Kiev, first of all?
I flew in. So
You
this
could
is
still fly in the night before the invasion.
there were a lot of canceled flights, but if I recall correctly, Turkish Airlines was still flying and they flew me in that night at around 8 p.m. And I remember I almost missed my flight because I was connecting through Istanbul,
Right.
and the flight was in some, you know, far off nether region of the airport, and
Yeah,
I
I've
really
taken those flights through. You can get great cheap flights through Istanbul and Turkish Airlines. So I've done that quite a few times, to connect to somewhere in Europe. So I know what you mean. Yeah.
make things worse. The boarding time that was listed on my boarding pass was actually the door closing time. So I arrived thinking, "Hey, I've got plenty of time,"
Yeah. All
and
right.
the last guy on the flight, or one of the last people on the flight.
Wow.
And that flight changed my
The last flight to Kiev. That's a good title too.
that flight changed my entire life. I mean, I spent the first year of the war covering it for NPR, covered the initial invasion, the siege of Kyiv, all the developments that happened that first year, um and then I left NPR and started my own company called The Counteroffensive, which is on
Yeah,
Substack.
which we want to get into, and you're a fantastic Substack. But look, just take us through. You get to Kiev the night before. I forget what day of the week this is, but did you know where you were going to stay? I mean, was
Yeah,
Kiev still functioning? Like you walk out, you get a taxi, you get an Uber,
the
and
four, I remember talking to my taxi driver who said, "There's no way it's happening." And the vast majority of Ukrainians never thought that it would happen, by the way. They all discounted the notion that uh, that this could even happen. Um, and so life was pretty normal the night of. I remember having a drink with someone who was also telling me the same thing, which is that the full scale invasion was just not going to occur. And then, of course, that morning it did in the early morning hours.
so what happened? Did you wake up like at 5 a.m. or something to the?
Up at 3 o'clock to my editor telling me, "Hey, something's going on outside. You better get down to a bomb shelter." And I remember just being totally
That's a
shocked.
that's that's an editorial call I've never had. Um,
Uh, I remember
Usually it's like, why don't you rewrite this paragraph?
I
Wow.
didn't immediately go run to a bomb shelter. Actually, I mean, I was just a little stunned, a little bit uh, sleep deprived, and so I remember I just
Yeah, war is not the best recommended way to overcome jet lag.
I
Yeah.
I, I remember getting out of bed and doing the first thing that I, you know, normally do, which is I just started brushing my teeth and staring at myself. What is going on here?
And did you come equipped with um, body armor, helmet?
Yeah.
So you brought all that with you.
Well, so there had been an advanced team, and so a lot of that stuff was already pre-staged for us in
I
case.
see. Advanced team from NPR.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
we had lodging, we had body armor, we had various equipment, and so when it did start, we were as prepared as we could be. Not mentally for what would happen next, but from a just a um, an equipment perspective. You see, the thing about it is that foreign correspondence and war correspondence in particular is the most expensive form of journalism by
yeah,
far, right? You
yeah,
need hundreds of thousands of dollars to make that work. That's why it's been such a struggle doing a Substack that's based on foreign correspondence because it is so expensive. Some Substacks are about domestic U.S. reporting, or in some cases it's key strategists and analysts talking about their experiences and their expertise, and that is relatively low cost,
yeah.
writing. But the insurance, the body armor, the medical gear, the gas, the
You have
logic,
to hire so-called fixers, right? Usually to help you get around.
interpreters. You need to hire interpreter. I mean, it is by far the most expensive form of journalism, and so that's why when I launched the counteroffensive, just about 2 years ago,
Yes. So
I,
just yeah, take us through that. So you decided to start your own media platform, really, right? I mean, what would
But
you consider
quite
the counteroffensive?
start that way. It didn't quite start that way. I
Okay.
went from from one last rotation in Ukraine, and I went to LA, which is where I had wanted to move to. NPR's West Coast office is in Culver City in LA,
I've
and
been to that. I've been to that several times. Yeah.
and I was sitting on the beach. I love to surf. That's why I wanted to go um to LA. I'm sitting there and I'm miserable. I'd gotten everything that I'd said that I wanted. And I realized that this isn't what I'm supposed to be doing with my life right now. And so
And at this point, you're how old, Tim?
at this point, this is 2023. So I'm, I'm 30, I'm 35, 36.
Most people decide they need to get a new car or like something like that at that point, maybe a
This is a myth.
motorcycle. But anyway,
I,
go ahead.
I'm not sure
You
this.
decided you wanted to start a new company.
Um, I just felt miserable not being in Ukraine. I felt like this is not what I ought to be doing with my life. And so when NPR was going through some layoffs in April 2023, and when a friend and colleague got chosen to be laid off, I basically put my hand up and I said, "Hey, I'll take your position in the layoffs and go and see if I can make this work." But because of the cost, right? Because it costs hundreds of thousands of dollars to do war correspondence safely. Um, I, to be honest, didn't expect it to have long-term potential. I went back to Kiev with an assignment for Rolling Stone magazine, which I expected to be kind of my main gig while I worked on my Substack as a kind of side gig. But somehow we've made it work over the last couple of years. Um, it's been really tough. Not just the finances, but also the cumulative toll that it takes on you as
Yeah.
you're a war zone over a 2 year period or a 3 year period.
Yeah. So let's just focus. So everybody listening to this and watching this, which is going to be a bunch of people, um, they subscribe to the counteroffensive. You can just it's right here on Substack. You can go and subscribe. You should become a paid member for all the reasons Tim is saying. Um, talk more about the counteroffensive. So what? How often do you try to post? Is it motivated by events, or you're on a regular schedule? How's it work?
So we didn't want to go back and just do the same thing the AP or Reuters was doing. So the focus of the counteroffensive is to do human interest reporting. So rather than
Right.
this happened today. What we also do is we introduce you to someone, we go really deep into their lives and understand who they are as people. And by getting to know them, you learn something important about the news, right? So, we have a story up that our most recent story this week it features a retired South Korean special operations general who was trying to explain to us why the South Koreans don't want the North Koreans, prisoners of war in Ukraine, used as negotiating chips with the Russians. I know that's a bit of a mouthful, but
Yeah, no, I've always thought just the emotional connection between yeah, no. North and South Koreans anyway is something that's very difficult to understand. I mean, I've had Korean friends that have tried to explain it to me, and I mean, they still see them as
yeah,
countrymen to some degree, right?
it
Yeah,
doesn't see North Korea as a legitimate country, right? And it believes that
yeah,
anyone born on the Korean Peninsula is thus a South Korean
yeah,
citizen. And so what they see these North Korean POWs sent by North Korea to help Putin invade Ukraine, they see these POWs as people forced into this conflict, and they have a lot of sympathy and
yeah.
affinity with POWs. And so Ukraine didn't, I don't think, when earlier this year, I don't think they realized this particular fold in geopolitics. And so
Hmm.
uh, Zelensky was making a big deal of going out and promising to trade these folks back to Russia, which a lot of South Koreans believe would be essentially a death sentence for them.
You
Uh,
probably would.
And so this is the way we get into deep geopolitical stories. I mean, we also had an investigation this week into Steve Witkoff, that's Trump's special envoy to Russia, his business ties and his conflict of interest as it relates to a Russia-linked business partner. And those dealings appear to be ongoing and substantial. Um, so we do human interest, we do investigations. We really want to create a sense of deeper understanding, right? So our motto is autocracy and empathy can't mix. That once you show the human cost of what dictators do, which is invade, kill, destroy, we'll all feel more motivated to do something about it. And that's the point of the counteroffensive.
And when you say we, it's you and you have others writing for it as well?
Yeah, so one of the big things about the counteroffensive now is that we've raised up a stable of Ukrainian writers, young Ukrainians who I'm teaching to write in the human interest style, to be able to share their story to the United States, to Europe, to the rest of the world for their whole careers, I hope. It's been hard raising, it's been kind of raising these journalists up and teaching, instilling in them
Interesting.
editorial standards and writing standards and kind of bringing them up. But we now have eight reporters working with us over two public.
Interesting.
We have the counteroffensive, which, as I mentioned, does the human interest stories. But we also have a publication, a trade publication called Counteroffensive Pro, which just covers the technical details of Ukrainian defense technology and how you can invest in it. And that's a fascinating kind of avenue that we've been
Right.
pursuing. Is the watching how quickly technology has changed in the front lines. It's been very, very crazy to watch.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think people appreciate how Ukraine had this great tech sector before the war and how sort of entrepreneurial,
Mm.
particularly, I mean, it'd be interesting. Do you see a real split in generation in that younger who didn't grow up in the Soviet system are more entrepreneurial than those who are older? I mean,
Mhm.
is there sort of a tangible divide there? You read about in stories about this in the military about Ukraine. You know that there's a generation of commanders who are trained by the Soviets that are more oriented that way, and those that are sort of post 2014.
You see, the Soviet era did have entrepreneurship, but it was black market entrepreneurship. It
Right.
is,
That's interesting.
how do you
Yeah.
how do you feel a little bit from this
Yeah.
to ensure that you can feed your family a little bit more than the median.
Yeah.
And so there are all sorts of crafty and in some cases corrupt methods that were used all throughout the Soviet Union. Now what you see is people can actually build things, and when they build things, they get rewarded in proportion to what they built. And that is a whole different kind of entrepreneurship, right? And what we're seeing in Ukraine is entrepreneurship, not just for entrepreneurship's sake, um, but it is literally it is literally to save their country and their
Yeah.
family, their neighbors from extinction. So you can see them so motivated to create things in ways you would never see IT workers or innovators in, you know.
Right. You're a normal person trying to build an app is, more along the lines of like how to get pizza delivery than how to save my family in America. No one is saying if I,
The
I
thing is
just,
really learning all these lessons in Ukraine that I think the United States is falling really, really far behind technologically because they're not understanding it.
Mhm.
Right? The use of small drones all across the front lines. The United States is not prepared to
Mhm.
with a near peer like a Russia or a China, in which drone warfare is going to be a predominant method of inflicting violence against the adversary. I'm really, really worried the United States is not prepared to win this war because the United States has really traditionally focused on really complex, really expensive gear. And we spent the last 25 years, the global war on terror was against an adversary that was absolutely dominated by us technologically, right? But now, when you have a $1,500 drone that can destroy a $3 million armored vehicle, The math doesn't make sense anymore.
Right.
If you're not actively involved in understanding how warfare has changed because of the war in Ukraine and Russia, you're falling behind, and I'm afraid the United States has fallen terribly behind.
And would you say the same is true for Great Britain?
I would say the closer you get to Ukraine, the more people are serious about, like, Poland,
Hmm.
Finland, Lithuania, Estonia. These are all countries that are really threatened by Russian authoritarianism, and it's no coincidence that these are the people who are also paying the most attention to what's happening in Ukraine, the tech, the regulation, uh, the tactics that are happening there, and then you're seeing a lot of investment from these countries going into Ukrainian startups and
Right.
trying to not only learn lessons, but you own some of these lessons.
Yeah, I remember, listen, I'm a great fan of the Ukraine podcast that the Telegraph does. And I remember they had a episode looking at where this was, I don't know, maybe 18 months ago. There'd been some project in the British military to build a drone that was costing millions and millions of pounds, and they were still working on it. And by the time they finished the thing, the whole technology had advanced. It was basically going to be replaced by, like, some kids making this in their garage for $1,500. It was just a ex- classic example of the different approaches to procurement, basically, is what we're talking about here, and innovation. Um,
Ukrainians really have the decentralized system of innovation where people it's kind of a vestige of the Soviet past, which was all about who you know. And so they deeply decentralize innovation down even to the brigade.
Interesting.
Right? And so it leads to a lot more customization, a lot more inventiveness, a lot more stuff being pushed to the front line and tested. And what that means then is tons of different kinds of cameras and electronic warfare and drone technologies all coming together at lightning speeds. We're talking 2, 3 week turnarounds. We had a story on the recently about the first ever all drone assault using ground drones and air drones, no people on the ground, pushing out a Russian entrenched position in the Kharkiv region. We had that exclusive. We went and spoke to the unit that did it. Um, so yeah, these kinds of stories are
Yeah,
interesting.
I saw that in Terminator. So, um, what is it like, uh, the impact of Trump that you just talking to Ukrainians, living with Ukrainians? Was there an expectation that Trump would win, do you think? And was there any thought that Trump might be a more I know there's so much frustration with the Biden administration on slow walking all of this. And of course, I'm sure lots of different opinions in the country, but was there a sense of dread that you felt after Trump won, or was there some sense like maybe this could be better?
There was a real belief in Ukraine that Trump might be the chaos agent they needed. I mean, you don't hear this talk more now in
Right.
April 25, but people would have pointed out that Trump was the guy who approved Javelin missiles for Ukraine. He was the person who opposed. His administration was pretty tough in some ways as it relates to Ukraine and Russia, not in all ways. But there was such a frustration in Kyiv about the Biden administration, which Ukrainians felt was giving them only enough equipment not to be
Not to
totally,
lose. Yeah.
certainly,
And do you think that's a fair criticism, Tim?
certainly a fair criticism that the Biden administration was not doing enough. But what we're now realizing is the Ukrainians didn't realize just how bad it could get, and they didn't expect Trump to be uh, Trump's agenda is to force a end to the war by any means possible, and if that means sacrificing the Ukrainians so that he can hold up a piece of paper that says, "I've got a deal," he's going to do it. And this has been obvious to me, and this has been something that I've been talking to my Ukrainian friends about for a long time. But there was just this hope that some element of chaos, some element of Trump coming in there and shaking things up might be able to push towards a better solution. I think, I don't hear that. I don't hear that talk.
What do you hear now?
I, you would think that things in Ukraine are pretty bad, and they are pretty bad. Um, but the idea that the Ukrainians are on their last legs. I just don't I don't I don't feel that. I don't understand that. I don't when I talk to people, um uh look, the Ukrainians defended Kyiv before the US
Yeah.
military 22 arrived. They're motivated to protect their country
Which
culture.
I find one of the more fascinating stories. Those that period, the passing out of Molotov cocktails to people to throw them out of their apartment buildings. I always wondered what happened to those Molotov cocktails. They were giving out seems like thousands. It would like people keep them in their closet. Anyway,
I
um,
think I think they were disarmed and and neutralized.
I remember a video of a guy who was like a violinist in the Kiev Symphony or something, and this is when you could go and get to the armory and they would give you an AK-47. And he was walking home and somebody was like, interviewing him on YouTube or something. He said, "What are you going to do?" And he goes, "I'm going to go home and I'm going to watch YouTube and try to figure out how to use this thing." And that was that was going to be the defense of Kiev. It's amazing. Um,
Yeah, but they managed to create
but
such
they
gigantic
did.
that they held Kyiv, which is something that no one was expecting at all.
Yeah. I mean, the U.S. and I think embarrassingly evacuated our embassy.
Well, here's the thing, like, the US has a really amazing intelligence apparatus, but what they're good at determining is, how many soldiers does Russia have and how many tanks does China have. They're very, very bad, as we've seen in Ukraine and in Afghanistan, of looking at will to fight, right? Because that's much more intangible. I think right now what's happening is that the United States, the Trump administration, has terribly, terribly, terribly underestimated Ukraine's continued willingness to fight. And the idea that Ukraine is, about to give up because it's losing a lot of lives. It is losing a lot of lives. Um, but that doesn't mean that the Ukrainians are going to roll over and just give up.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's obviously an underappreciation by any of us who haven't spent time in Ukraine, but particularly by some of the least empathetic leaders we've ever had in American history, and like J.D. Vance, who's this weird damaged guy, and Donald Trump, a weird damaged guy, of what it would mean if Ukraine lost. I mean, what these stories of what it's like in these areas that that Russia has occupied, and the horror stories, the torture centers, the abduction of children. One of the things that I just find so extraordinary is there's not a community in America that if there was an Amber Alert about a child being taken, that would not mobilize that community. And yet here we have thousands, tens of thousands of children being abducted in Ukraine. And we seem like, oh, what? So what? I find that so reminiscent of 1930s of what was happening in Germany. Um,
Well, I think the point is that what we're seeing is diplomacy that's not so far away from what we saw in Munich, right?
yeah,
Hitler will stop if we give him this part of Czechoslovakia.
right.
Um, Telling a dictator, "You're violent, your threats of violence, your violence has been rewarded, and I guess you'll stop now." It's just not a good. It's insensitive,
Childish. It's childish.
and
Yeah.
it's only a matter of time until the war resumes, either in Ukraine or another part of Europe. And it would be a terrible, terrible outcome. But right now, I'm kind of looking at the cards here, and I'm thinking, God, I mean, I hope it's not the case. But it looks like the United States is not going to be able to get the deal at once, and it's going to disengage and then pull the plug and try to walk away as if it doesn't
I
have.
just, listen, as somebody who was drawn to the Republican Party when it was Reagan standing in front of the Berlin Wall, Mr. Gorbachev tore down this wall. I just think the compromising of the Republican Party by Russia is one of the great stories in American history that is under It's still vastly underappreciated. I mean, there is for decades, the core of the anti-Soviet Union strong on Russia was the most conservative element of the Republican Party. And now it is the beating heart of the Putin party. And how did this happen? In some ways, I think we overthink this. Russia tried to elect a president. They got the president they wanted. I mean, it's the most successful covert operation in history by far. What did they get? Turns out they got more than they ever vastly could have imagined. I mean, the Republican Party is basically, if they cannot stop Trump from disengaging from Ukraine, they are basically, the Republican Party has become a asset of Russia. I mean, they're doing, I don't know how else to phrase it. They're doing what Russia wants. Um,
Yeah, I think we're we're both kind of analytical minds, and there's this temptation to try to make our explanations complex, right? Like, I see all sorts of
yeah,
explanations for, oh, these tariffs are meant to crush the economy so that they could have a lower interest rate on U.S. debt, or Trump is playing 4D chess, and he's trying to tear the Russian Chinese relationship apart so that we can have a grand bargain between the powers of the world. And it's not that complicated, okay? When it comes to Ukraine, Donald Trump simply admires Vladimir Putin and has for many
yeah,
years, back to when he was a when he
yeah.
was
When he was
interested.
putting on Miss Universe contest in Moscow.
Right, and wanted to do business dealings with Russia. And this has been a years long uh, obsession, as have tariffs. And these two may be the most kind of consistent positions that Trump has had in his entire lifetime.
Yeah, that's so underappreciated. It's so true. Look, we got to wrap this up. Wrap this up. But talk to me. You read a lot about the growing realization in Europe that we're going to live in a post NATO world, and that Europe is going to have to increase its defense spending, which is happening, um, and that ultimately the GDPs of the EU is much greater than Russia, that it can sustain Ukraine in this war, and there's sort of a new realization of the seriousness. And it does seem to be calibrated, as you were saying, by almost like kilometers from Russia.
Mm.
That's a degree. And finally, maybe the Germans are coming around. But is there a sense in Ukraine that this is happening? I mean, do you think it's happening?
It is happening, but you can't just snap your fingers and
Yeah.
have a defense industry pop up overnight. It involves manufacturing and innovation and investment. It involves changing the whole nature of regulation. Just a couple years ago, if you're a defense company, you'd find it very very hard to bank in Europe, right? Because they didn't, European banks didn't want to be involved in the production of things that killed them.
Interesting.
Until recently, until the full-scale invasion of Ukraine by Russia, many people in the IT sector wanted nothing to do with any sort of tech company that had military applications. Now they're looking around
I didn't
and
realize that. Yeah.
okay, these are the types of technologies we need to literally survive. We got to change the way we think about this. And there has been a very dramatic change, but it's not enough to change your thinking about it. The laws need to be changed. Manufacturing plants need to be built, investments need to be made, tech needs to be created. I mean, this is a years long project. And although Ukraine can count on for now the support of Europe, Europe is giving a lot of support and kind of hopes and prayers, but it doesn't have the manufacturing base, defense manufacturing base the United States has. And so the United States still remains this incredibly indispensable partner to Ukraine.
People, the stat that I always go back to is the United States military is larger than the next 9 countries combined. Which I just find mind-boggling. You're talking about, these are not small countries. India, Russia, the United Kingdom, the- China. 9 of them were still the amount of money that we spend. We're in 180 countries that we acknowledge that we're in. I mean, and so we got Pete Hegseth running this. Can you imagine? It's it's just it's another whole episode. But look, let me just end by thanking you for doing this, Tim. Um, it's not to embarrass you. It is courageous. I mean, you're living in a place where you could get killed. You're doing a job that you could get killed, and I think that, I mean, and you had this career in the U.S. that had a certain path that would be very comfortable, and you'd be living in, someplace like D.C. in a nice place, going out at night, not having to worry about going to a bomb shelter. And instead, you took this path. And I just think it's so in the great tradition of war correspondence. And there's been so many great American war correspondents or writers who became war correspondents, which is really, you know, A.J. Liebling's an example of incredible stuff that they wrote. So I think we all owe you a thanks for doing this, and we should support you. So everybody, please go and subscribe and get a paying subscription to the counteroffensive, because that's really the only way. There's no billionaire out there who is, calling up Tim and saying, it's okay, go spend $500,000 on this because, we'll eat it. Um, so thanks. Let's do this again. And everybody out there, it's the same with what we're doing at Lincoln Square. I mean, we started this because there clearly is a breakdown of all the traditional roles of media, the economics of media becoming so much more difficult. And no one's going to save us but ourselves. And I think the success that you've had, that Lincoln Square has had, is one of the more encouraging moments in this discouraging period. So everybody should try to support those writers, those efforts that you think are caring, doing what you like to read and find useful and find important. So,
Yeah, Substack now has a pretty easy way. If you're watching this on the app, you can just go to the upper left-hand corner and click on our names, Lincoln Square Media or Tim Mak with the Counteroffensive, and click through subscribe just through the app. And
yeah,
then if you want to get a subscription, a paid subscription, you'll have to do that on desktop.
yeah. All right, brother. Well, listen, thanks so much. And let's do this again.
Thank you so much, Stuart. It's great
All
to
right.
see you.
All the best.
All right, bye.